on TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV.
Tonight on Piers Morgan Uncensored with me, Jeremy Kyle. Stabbed for his words as Salman Rushdie fights for his life. We'll discuss one of the fights of his life, the defence of free speech.
Our proposal, which is to prevent those energy prices increases going forward.
Starmer chameleon emerges from his summer in camouflage, but is Labour's energy crisis plan off colour?
The England players protesting to the referee.
Plus, Peter Shilton, one of the greatest goalies of all time, on keeping the dark secret of his gambling addiction. Good evening, my friends, and a big, big welcome to Piers Morgan Uncensored. I'm Jeremy Kyle. Now, stand by, inform the authorities, call off the search parties, take down your posters, and relax, my friends, because Sir Keir Starmer has been located safe and well. There he is, finally back from the beach with a massive plan to tackle your cost of living crisis. He says he wants to freeze your fuel bills. No word yet on whether he'll stop blowing hot air to facilitate that, but at least he's back on dry land, which is more than can be said of our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is again on holiday.
Not another one?
Yes, dear, another one. The PM's on his second holiday in a fortnight. Last week in Slovenia, this time in Greece. But do not fret, because officials insist he's working from home. We wrote this. Yeah, right. Next week he's working from Rome. But speaking of dry land, the arid land of Great Britain, some great news, my friends. It's raining! Give me that umbrella! Watch this. We prayed for a downpour, and the heavens... Oh, my, it's windy as well. The heavens have opened. Weeks of baking sunshine have left the UK as dry as Prince Andrew's armpits. But now, 3 days of thunderstorms are set to drench the nation. It's raining cats and dogs out there. I stepped on a poodle in the way in. Goodness me. From sizzle to drizzle, from pain to rain, we're building back water. Drip, drip, hooray! Or not. Big news. Sadly, the Met Office says otherwise. Don't be too late. Demonstrating Britain's limitless capacity for innovation in complaining about the weather, experts tonight say it's the wrong kind of rain. Intensive downpours apparently won't actually solve the drought crisis. This yellow, arid land is so parched it can't absorb the water, meaning we're going to be flooded instead. So we're still doomed, and we're going to be just as miserable. But it does, of course, beg the big question. What on earth is the right kind of rain? Because I must, like you, think that all rain's supposed to be wet. Here's a really interesting man from the Met Office to rain on our parades.
Change is on the way next week with some heavy rain in places, but at first it'll come in the form of thundery downpours. Intense thunderstorms are the wrong way to end a drought. The rain will be hit and miss. Some places will stay dry. And where the heaviest rain does occur, there's a risk the rain will run straight off the parched ground and cause flash flooding.
What happy, happy news. Right, first tonight, does free speech ever go too far? Legendary British author Salman Rushdie was stabbed on stage in New York State last week. He's now off a ventilator, but remains in a critical condition. The 75-year-old has faced years of death threats over his novel The Satanic Verses, which some Muslims see as blasphemous. Comedian Dave Chappelle was attacked on stage in May, and Netflix has faced repeated calls to drop him over his jokes on gender and trans issues. Rarely, though, are attacks on free speech so literal and so dangerous. But performers face the ever-present threat of cancel culture. On the same day that Rushdie was attacked, comedian Jerry Sadowitz had his Edinburgh show axed over complaints of racism and misogyny. And, of course, Britain's own Jimmy Carr faced a massive backlash for a joke about gypsies and the Holocaust, a joke he said could have ended his career. So for us tonight, there's one big question. Is there such a thing as too much free speech, or should we always defend the right to offend? Now, joining me from New York, I'm joined by Conservative author Douglas Murray. To quote Piers Morgan, Douglas, has the world gone nuts, my friend?
I would question, if I may. You said at the beginning, is there any limit to free speech? And I'm rather disturbed we're still discussing this. It's 3 decades and more since the Satanic Verses affair. It was in 1989 that the Ayatollah Khomeini did the unpardonable, unforgivable thing of calling for the murder of a British novelist for the crime of writing a novel. And we had these debates back then. Where are the limits to free speech? Has Mr. Rushdie committed a crime as well as the Ayatollah? And a lot more guff like that. I'm rather disturbed that in all of the decades since, with all of the people who've been killed for asserting their right to free speech, or asserting their right to say what they think and for the rest of us to hear it, but we're still at this elementary playground level of discussion. I'm sorry to say that, but this is a long, long answered question. Our societies have perfectly good incitement laws in place. The rest of it, I'm sorry, no, we're not adapting our own speech codes. We're not going to make ourselves more sensitive to people who famously burn books that they can't even read. I mean, the Ayatollah Khomeini had never even read the Satanic Verses when he asked Muslims around the world to kill Salman Rushdie. It's an unpardonable thing that has happened. It is extraordinary to me that we're still having this discussion. Mm-hmm. We had the same discussion 7 years ago when the cartoonists of Charlie Hebdo were being murdered. We had the same discussion in all of these decades, and it's Muslims and non-Muslims who've been attacked. And we in the West still have this pathetic discussion about, oh, what are the limits of free speech? Really, we've got to get better than that.
Douglas, I agree with you, but it's not just Islam, is it? We'll talk to Abdullah Al-Andalusi in a minute. But it's also comedy. We talked about Dave Chappelle, we talked about Jimmy Carr. There doesn't seem to be a week that goes by without some comedian making a joke that a certain group, a certain number of people find distasteful. I obviously
that might be true.
I obviously come from a different planet, because here's what I would say. We have an on-off button. If you want to go and see a comedian, you buy a ticket. If you want to watch a television programme, you pick that channel. If you want to read Salman Rushdie's book, you surely have a right. Are we not getting to the point where free speech is under attack in our world, in our nation?
It's been under attack for a long time. I don't particularly care for a lot of the sort of belly aching and complaining on rather frivolous online stuff that I hear from a lot of authors and others. I think that people have to toughen up a bit on some of that. But the Rushdie affair has always been in a different class, and there's a reason for that. And there's a reason why so many people today are willing to make death threats against authors and others for all sorts of things, including comedians. And it's because they saw that it works. Yeah. It works. When the Ayatollah called for the murder of Salman Rushdie, people on the left and right of British politics and of British culture made excuses for the fatwa. I'm sure we'll hear some excuses today. They learned, our societies learned, that if somebody says, I'm offended, and then says, and as a result, I'm going to kill, you better be damn sure that you're willing to die for that. And unfortunately, the success of the Ayatollah's fatwa, among other things, is that it showed a load of other disgruntled people what they could do if they only had the disgustingness to think that they could exercise violence as an opposition to the pen. And I'm afraid that what happened, as I say, is that Muslim extremists across the UK and across the world showed they could intimidate people, and others undoubtedly have learned from this. But let's remember, Britain in 1989, we allowed Muslims in Bradford to burn the Quran, the Satanic Verses on the streets of Britain. We allowed prominent figures like Cat Stevens to excuse the murder of Salman Rushdie on the television. We allowed Iranian officials who had called for Rushdie's murder to live in London. Like, how stupid are we?
Interesting, Douglas. Thank you for Now New York. Let's pick up now with journalist Martha Gill, Emma Wedd from the Free Speech Union, and co-founder of the Muslim Debate Initiative, Abdullah Al-Andalusi. Let's start with you, if we can, Abdullah. Quite a strong rhetoric from Douglas Murray. I'm always aware that Muslim extremists do not in any way speak for the majority of Muslims. But to be fair, the Iranian government over the weekend said Rushdie was to blame for being attacked. That is completely and utterly despicable, isn't it?
Well, firstly, I find it rather strange that Douglas Murray, who's had a history of advocating for restrictions on Muslim speakers at universities...
But you can answer my question. Do you think it's despicable that the Iranian government have said that he took it on himself? He was stabbed in broad daylight. Do you find that despicable?
But if I may, he deigns to say he's a champion for free speech, so to speak, but yet his organisation argued for restrictions on, for platforms for Muslim speakers going to universities. He wanted to ban the burqa in public buildings and a kind of social ban on it in public. So for him, and argued that conditions for Muslims in Europe must be made harder across the board.
Let's bring Douglas back in. Douglas, wait.
I find it a little. I find it a little bit strange that he should deign to call himself, brazenly call himself, or at least imply he's some kind of champion for free speech. Or free expression.
Look, I've probably got to answer that. You'll have noticed, and all of your viewers will have noticed, that this Islamist lunatic in your studio can't answer the basic question. Let's try it again and make it simple for you. Why don't you say whether or not you are completely condemning of any violence against Salman Rushdie or anyone else who is deemed to have said something heretical? Why don't we start with the basics for you?
OK, firstly, I want to answer his question, because he asked me first, which is about the Iranian regime. Well, having not being an Iranian citizen nor participated in any elections to elect the Iranian regime, the Iranian regime doesn't really represent 1.8 billion Muslims. And
OK, so if you're here representing 1.8 billion Muslims, it's very simple. Douglas has just said it. All right, as your own self, having heard what he said, do you accept people saying, be it the Iranian government or Muslim extremists, and I made the caveat and I repeat it, Muslim extremists, that one of the biggest problems I have is that people look at the whole thing and they shouldn't. Do you agree with anybody who comes up with the sentence, he was to blame for being knifed in broad daylight 15 times in his neck? Do you?
The only person to blame for the knifing of Salman Rushdie is the assailant himself.
Not the Iranian regime who put the fatwa on him in the first place.
Well, unless you can demonstrate that they were specifically colluding or they sent an agent.
They said he was to blame.
He was in communication with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
That's their opinion, right? But I'm only here to talk about, if you're asking me who's to blame, I say the assailant, much like Douglas Murray said that the Christchurch killer, the one who massacred the Muslims in the mosque, that only the killer was to blame, not those who radicalised him into viewing Muslims as a threat to the West.
What you'll find is that if somebody put millions of dollars on someone's head, yours, for instance, or mine, and somebody then attacked us, you would think that the person who had put millions of dollars on our head would bear some responsibility. But because you're such a dishonest weasel, you're not even willing to do that. You're not even willing to do the basic thing of condemning the attack.
Sticks and stones, Douglas Murray, sticks and stones.
Why don't we
You need to demonstrate that the person was motivated by the reward.
I'll tell you what I'd like to motivate. I'll tell you what I'd like to demonstrate. This is my programme. Martha Gill, journalist. What's your opinion on this situation?
Well, it's completely horrific. I completely agree with the other two, with Douglas Murray, in that if putting a bounty on someone's head in the first place is an act of violence, whether or not that's followed up by people taking on the challenge, and clearly somebody has, and they are entirely to blame for that.
Let's move on to... I wanted to ask you generally, you've been quite open about free speech. When does free speech cross a line, Martha?
So every functioning society has to have some limits on free speech. If you agree with any law on hate speech, then you agree on limits to free speech in society. If you say, actually, it's fine to say anything, you quickly run up against a paradox, which is that you say it's fine to somebody to go on TV and call for the death of somebody else for expressing a view. So their freedom of speech is immediately restricting the freedom of speech of others. So you do need some limits on free speech in a free society. Now, of course, we can argue where you draw the line.
I was going to say, Emma, would you say we've gone too far?
In restricting free speech?
Yeah.
I think absolutely we have. I agree with Douglas that I think that short of incitement, those things that are illegal under the law, incitement being things like, for example, putting a fatwa out on somebody, that would count as incitement in my book because it's actively calling for violence against someone. And in this case, for something that someone has written.
Does incitement compel people to actually be violent, though?
Well, hold on a second. Does it incite them? It encourages them. If you are through a group or a clan or whatever you want to say, and I'm treading carefully for obvious reasons, if you feel that you're following a group, whatever it is, and they're telling you to do something, you go, you're sitting there saying that bloke wasn't. I mean,
isn't that my free will, though? Isn't the whole basis of the Western system based on people's free will?
Do you believe that man would have gone and stabbed Salman Rushdie unless he had been encouraged, incentivised, galvanised, whatever words you want, from people, the Iranian government, who say Salman Rushdie is to blame on putting a fatwa on his head? That's wrong,
I'm
isn't it?
simply saying that, unlike knee-jerk dog whistle politics we hear from Douglas Murray, why don't we wait to the court case to see what motivated the individual? I'm waiting for the evidence. I'm waiting to, what does he say motivated him? If he said it was motivated by the Iranian government fatwa, fine, I accept.
Do you not think he might have been? I guess is the question.
Yeah, he might have been,
right.
Yes.
I'd like to finish my point.
Yeah, go.
So we have in this country a teacher who is still in hiding, the teacher from Batley Grammar School, because he showed a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad to his class. He's still in hiding with his young family. That is in this country now. I think that what we have done as a result of everything that happened with Salman Rushdie in the intervening 33 years, I think that we have internalised this attitude of censorship, so that now if somebody wanted to write a book like Salman Rushdie's book, no publisher would touch them because they would know what the implications would be for that person, because we've internalised Sharia law on this. We've internalised, in many ways, we've internalised the censorship of radical ideological groups.
I don't think you can compare an illiberal regime such as the one in Iran to the one here.
That's not what I was doing. But...
No, of course, but you can't really compare the types of restriction on free speech. We have some restrictions laid down in law. They have a huge number of restrictions enforced by their government and ruling groups. The way that free speech gets restricted here is more by a process of consensus and debate, like the debate we're having here, on where lines should be drawn. It's often done with individuals. You can pretty much say anything you like if you find the right audience for it.
I would love to sit here all night. I literally am being shouted at in my ear. We could continue this. To all of you, Abdullah, thank you so much indeed. Douglas Murray from New York, Martha Gill, and obviously Emma Webb. Everybody has an opinion. Somebody said to me today, the attacker of Salman Rushdie, like millions of others worldwide, almost certainly had absolutely no knowledge of the Satanic Verses, a book that came out 33 years ago. So one would have to wonder, is he just an evil person or is he motivated? What are your thoughts? It's important. At the end of the day, everybody will have their own opinion. Don't go anywhere. Next on Uncensored, the big news. Sir Keir Starmer is back. The opposition leader has risen from his sun lounger, put down his paperback, not the Satanic Verses, and finally broken his silence on the cost of living crisis. The big question, should our non-existent government, who we haven't seen, listen? We'll get the lowdown from my experts. It's coming next. We're coming right back in 3. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, my friends. Now, we've given Sir Keir Starmer a hard time recently for holidaying in a national crisis. But like a British train, my friends, he's arrived late and lacking power. But he does at least have a plan. And in the absence of anything much from the British government, we thought we'd have a look at it. Let's cut it down. Labour says it will freeze the current energy price cap, which is £1,971, and they believe that could rise to £4,000 by January. So they're going to freeze it at that, £1,971. It'll pay for that, Labour says, by backdating the windfall tax on oil and gas companies to January, which will raise £8 billion. Quite useful. They'll also then cancel the planned £400 rebate before you go on energy bills. That'll save £14 million, which it also reckons will reduce inflation, saving another £7 billion on government debt. Now, here's the interesting thing, because we have been moaning at Starmer and the opposition to come up with something good, because we're waiting for the Tories to choose a new leader, and the Tories are waiting for that new leader to tell them what the hell's going on. Today, The Times reports that 75% of grassroots Conservatives even back at Sir Keir's plan. So here he is, the man with the tan, explaining it in his own words. Have a look.
Our proposal, which is to prevent those energy prices increases going forward, will also dampen inflation, and therefore the money that would otherwise be paid on our debt because inflation is so high would not have to be paid.
Joining me now is our financial expert Gemma Godfrey and debt expert Salim Shafi from money advice service Money Buddies. Welcome both. We have been saying for a long time, where are you? And when you look at Labour's plan, what do you think? Because a host of Tories are going, that's a good idea.
Well, the big problem with, obviously, the increasing energy prices is that it's a humanitarian crisis. It's going to amount to people spending, on average, 2 months' salary to cover their 1 month's energy bill. It's completely untenable. So, on the one hand, freezing it, that makes sense in terms of trying to lessen the burden. But the big problem is some of the assumptions they're making that this is going to reduce inflation, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to happen. And also, it's a short-term solution. It's like putting a plaster on something. But ultimately, what it doesn't solve is the fact that 30 energy suppliers went bust since the beginning of 2021. And, what are they going to be able to do long-term to make us more energy independent?
I think, Salim, welcome to the show. I think the message, and I absolutely agree with you, Gemma, but the one thing that we have been calling out for as a nation is for somebody to stand up from the British government and say we're going to do something. And we've talked about, short-term measures, the green levy, VAT on fuel. This might be a sticking plaster, but actually politically, the people of this country are hearing Starmer and the opposition saying something that they think they can at least think about. And the government's doing nothing, it seems, right?
Absolutely. This is something that relates to people's mindsets at the moment.
Yeah.
We're in a national crisis. Lives are going to be lost this winter. If we were at war, what would we be saying? Raise the money. So this is a really strong measure to actually help people feel safe about themselves. If you feel safe about your energy costs going into the winter, you're more likely to start thinking about maybe perhaps spending some money through the next few months, and that will actually help to keep the economy going. We're getting people into the mentality of saving and hoarding their money. When you get into that, then where's the investment? Where do people then start to look forward? We had this kind of thing in 2008 when the corporates themselves nearly doubled their cash reserves simply because they were worried about the future. This is now happening to the nation. Unless we can kind of get out of this mentality of hoarding money now and help people feel safe about spending the money, we're going to be in a situation where the economy suffers even more.
I completely agree. And I've talked politically, Gemma, that I feel like Starmer's stolen a march, which I didn't think I'd ever say. But let's talk about debt. Last week we talked about the housing market, we talked about rentals, and we talked about how difficult it is for people. And one of the annoying things for me about politicians, I'm not sure they quite get it. The words are fine, but people are suffering, and I think Salim's absolutely right. I heard that guy say to me last week, we should all be aiming towards getting a mortgage. What would you say to the people watching this right now who are seriously in debt? Forget that they can't pay their energy bills. Forget that they will not be able to heat their homes or feed their kids. They're in debt already. It's like they're sinking. Do we have a message? Do we have constructive help for them? Because that, for me, is what should be happening now.
Absolutely, and I think one of the biggest problems we have is the interest that's charged on debt.
Yep.
Because it's not just the amount that's owed, it gets bigger and bigger because the interest is a percentage of what is owed, and it can just skyrocket, and actually people can find it very hard to get out of. And I think, you know, look, there are lots of different things that people can do, and I absolutely think they should be going to advice centres to try and get some impartial advice. But I think what's really important is to be able to speak up and try and ask for help. So, for example, if there's problems with energy bills, utility providers can actually provide a holiday and allow people more time to pay, reduce their payments, because it's not in the energy company's interest either that people just stop paying either. Same thing with banks. What's quite easy to do is fall into an unarranged overdraft, and again, get whacked with fees, and that makes things worse. But calling them up and trying to get an arranged overdraft, again, it's not a long-term solution, but it could stop them slipping. But people that are already in debt, prioritising it, focusing on the higher interest debt, not getting swayed into consolidating it, and it may reduce the interest slightly, which is good short-term, but if you're paying for longer, again, that could increase the amount as well. So I think really going out and trying to speak up and trying to get some support for each individual's personal circumstances is going to be very important, because it can seem overwhelming and affect people's mental health.
I think that's the point, isn't it, Salim, that a lot of people watching this will feel they're in such a rut that they cannot see any way out. They're working. I always talk about the jams. I talk about it every week, just about managing. Yeah. I have great sympathy for people on benefit. I don't have any sympathy for rich people who get the energy cap. What I'm talking about is those people who are, you know, the mother and the father both work, right? They've got 2 kids, probably. I'm not painting a picture, but they're paying everything out and they've got nothing. And they're really, really suffering. And the message, I think Gemma makes a great point about mental health. This is dragging this nation down, isn't it?
It is. Well, just on the mental health thing, if you have stress for 20 minutes or more, just around 20 minutes, you start to damage brain structures inside yourself, which are really about connecting with people, connecting with yourself, being able to express your issues and problems. So alleviating and putting this price cap, capping the price cap, this next few months will actually alleviate stress on so many people. In terms of debt, we had the Just About Managing 2 years ago. It's just about surviving. Yeah. We're seeing clients now who haven't eaten for a number of days. That's only going to get worse.
Can I just stop there? Because people say, oh, you do this every night, Carly. Yeah, I do, because that is not just a soundbite. People will not be eating. I mean, we had somebody on from one of those food banks the other day, and he said, I had a middle-class family, in effect. Haven't eaten for 4 days. It's not just homeless people, for God's sake. There are people all over the place going, I cannot afford it. Had a friend, relevant story, but just take it for what it is. Had a mate today who went to buy his daughter her first second-hand car. The APR had gone from 5.9% to 22.5%. Everybody is struggling and making money, and financial organisations will take advantage, won't they?
Absolutely, and I think what we're talking here is about essential items. This isn't somebody buying a luxury item and having to cut back. This is people deciding. Again, I get asked this all. The big question I've been asked at the moment is, shall I stay at home and then save on my petrol, or shall I go to the office to save on my energy bills? I mean, that is what the decisions people are making.
Just imagine that. What would you say about debt? I liked what you said about debt advice companies. Are they, in the past, have they been frowned upon? You say they care and they can help,
yes,
right?
They are. This is a caring sector. It's a non-judgmental sector. They're in the roles. They do these roles because they care about people. And one thing about seeing a debt advice agency like ourselves, and there are many others in the UK too, is that we protect clients from the behaviours of creditors. Yeah. And when we speak to creditors, they change their tone with us and helps keep... We're like an invisible force field for clients. And this can make people feel much safer about themselves, much more relaxed, and again, be able to get on with their life.
When you are in debt, spiralling out of debt and out of control and debt, and there's bills coming in, you can't see any clarity to your problem. No. What debt advice agencies will do is clear the minutiae out of your brain and give you a clear path. Would you advocate them as well?
Absolutely, and I think there's a really clear distinction here between debt advice, impartial advice that's there to help, and then the companies that are there to say, well, we're going to consolidate your loans. They're talking about a product, they're selling a product. You're right, there are scams, there are certain terms you have to look for, so that you should really pay a lot of attention to. But ultimately, free, impartial debt advice that's run by a charity, you know, that is there to be able to help.
Somebody once told me, a bank manager years ago told me that banks make money by lending people money. So your theory about going to a debt advice agency and, you know, I'm wallowing in, I don't know what to do, you taking it over, they want their money back, but they're also going to have to be realistic. It's like the utility companies. If everybody can't pay their bills, they won't have a business. So people need to meet in the middle. Just both of you, the message to people watching this who are in debt, a positive message, a helpful message, what would you say, Jen?
I would say I think just as Brits, we tend to get very easily embarrassed when we talk about money, but there is absolutely no shame.
No.
I mean, it's not just at all levels of society, people are living off credit cards, you know, but really speaking up and trying to find a solution is going to be incredibly important before it spirals or to try and help get yourself out of it. There are people that want to help.
Brilliant. Salim, to
Yeah,
finish?
people shouldn't feel alone. You're not alone in this. There's many people in similar positions to themselves. And it's really about just picking up the phone, speak anonymously. A 5-minute chat with a debt advisor, with a money buddy, can be the difference between sleeping and not sleeping. Can be the difference between eating and not eating.
And do you know what I think about this cost of living crisis? I think it's going to change people's behaviour.
Yeah.
We've talked about mental health, we've talked about opening up, people going and seeing a doctor or a psychologist or talking to somebody in debt or companies. We are going to have to learn to probably be a little less British and a little less stiff upper lip and open up, because the message is everybody's in the same boat, right?
Absolutely.
Gemma, Godfrey, Salim, thank you so much indeed for coming on the show tonight. Right next on Uncensored, the most capped England football player ever. We could use one of those caps on the price of butter, couldn't we? Did you like that? England legend Peter Shilton on his lifelong struggle with gambling addiction, a subject close to my heart. We're coming back in 3.
This is Talk TV.
Welcome back to Uncensored. Now, last week, the gambling group behind brands like Betfair and Paddy Power announced that its share price is soaring. Flutter Entertainment said there is, quote, no discernible sign of a consumer slowdown despite the cost of living crisis. So as the general public looks for ways to ease the burden on themselves, are we turning to gambling as a quick fix? England legend Peter Shilton, regarded as one of the greatest goalkeepers of all time, kept a dark secret for much of his life. a chronic gambling addiction. England's most capped player, Peter Shilton, had the world in the palm of his hands. A glittering club career spanning 3 decades, representing some of Britain's biggest sides at the time, winning 2 European Cups, a UEFA Super Cup and a First Division Championship. Shilton represented England at 3 World Cups, less said about some than others. But Shilton was a household name, both home and abroad. But behind the fame and the accolades, Shilton was living with a crippling addiction. Throughout his playing career, he was living a double life as a gambling addict, one that nearly ruined him, not only financially, but mentally and physically. Peter Shilton joins me now. Peter, delighted to have you on the show. Thank you. How much have you lost from gambling?
I would say it was over 45 years, but I would say it was into millions, really. I started out, I had a real passion for horse racing. That was my thing. I didn't really, you know, in those days when I started, there was no slot machines and that type of thing. Yeah, it started out as a hobby and just gradually got more and more. I owned horses. I loved going up the gallops. I loved going to trainers, stables and that type of thing. But then the gambling side just accelerated, and obviously I didn't realise, because money fuels gambling, and when you're earning decent money, not like they earn these days, but you know that there's plenty of money coming in, and that's the thing that keeps you going, really.
Somebody once said to me about gambling, and I had a period early on in my life, that you lie to yourself, you lie to everybody around you, you make excuses, you believe that one big win is round the corner. Did you hide it from your wife, Steph, who, by the way, you now credit with helping you end this 45-year addiction? Do you remember that moment, though, when you had to admit to her that so much had been lies and that you were really in the mire?
Yeah, I mean, I'd met Steph, and, I think we knew very quickly that we were made for each other. I was going through a divorce at the time. And to be fair, we just literally sort of... I think Steph knew there was something not right, because gamblers, you just touched on it, we're very secretive. You can keep secrets, you can... from anybody, If
you can lie to yourself, you can lie to those you love,
yeah.
Right?
And she knew there was a problem. She'd been in the NHS, and she started working on me a little bit, in terms of trying to make me realise, that what I was doing wasn't right. And it eventually paid off. There was a moment when I'd had a particularly bad weekend, and I went upstairs and I was phoning an agent that I'd done a job for, and just basically saying, can you pay me a bit early, I'll give you a drink. And I looked round and Steph was behind me, and I just knew in her face that, she'd sort of caught me, really.
Did you break down?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I finally said, look, I've got to stop. I know I've got to stop, and I don't want to lose you. And that was... She always said, look, I would never have left you, but she did make a few, things where she made me feel as though she might be leaving, and that was the big thing. And also, we wanted to get married, and she says, we can't get married until we sort out, the money side of things and the security side of things.
She talked to my team about the shock of seeing a bank statement showing you lost 18 grand in 1 month, and how she revealed on one occasion she found you in the middle of a night in Australia in a hotel having an online bet. So there was a lot of duplicity.
Well, I was at home looking at the Australian
There was a lot
racing.
of duplicity,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing is, once I finished playing football, and the online started, it even accelerated even more.
Does she trust you now, Pete?
Oh, it was 7.5 years ago when I finished, and I knew myself. I had unbelievable amount of effort from Steph, to make me stop. But I knew myself at the time that...
Why? What was the moment? Why did you know, after 45 years of gambling and wanting to get that rush, get that thrill, why did you know...
Because I think I'd had enough of losing. She used to come in and say, oh, it's the losing Racing Post, and oh, yeah, you bet you've lost again today. And I kept thinking to myself, well, I used to win at everything in football, in my career. And
well, when you look at that, the most decorated goalkeeper ever, really, the most extraordinary, apart from that cheating thing. But when you look at your career and the adulation that so many felt, do you feel that you sullied that by the gambling? Do you feel...
No, because I didn't have to come out and, and sort
Did it affect your game at all?
No, it never... I had 2 careers. One was football. Nothing ever affected football. I mean, it was my love. It was a job I was made to do. And, when I was away from football, you know, then I'd sit and in between matches and gamble, and it just gradually got more and more and more.
I was going to talk to you about that. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks that football should be doing a lot more to stop a generation of gamblers and drinkers because, you know, they train for a couple of hours in the morning. These kids, they're on £200,000 a week. They're going to get into trouble. Do clubs need to do more, do you think?
Oh, I think so, definitely. I mean, it's rife in football now. You know, it's made for... In sport, generally, you know, it's when you're competing and then you have a period of, you know, having to recover and what have you. It's made for, you know, keeping on a high and gambling and yeah, you know, it's rife, definitely rife now. And the thing is, when you're earning money, people can keep it secret.
But somebody said to me, and I didn't know this until earlier, nearly half of Premier League teams are sponsored by betting companies last season, including Newcastle United and my team, West Ham. What does that do if you've got players struggling with those sorts of addictions? That sends a powerful message, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the gambling companies, you know, have had carte blanche, really, since 2005 with, you know, with improved profits, that they've just been able to do what they want. You know, they send up different advertising things. My big thing is shirt sponsorship in football and, you know, around the grounds, because I think football's got a very unhealthy association with gambling, considering it's a family game and it's the beautiful game. And football needs to put its house in order. But I think, you know, generally that a lot needs doing. The government of delaying a white paper that should have been out in December.
Your wife, Steph's working with the government.
Yeah, we're doing it together. I mean, the reason I came out was because I spoke to a charity called Gambling with Lives. It was run by people who lost loved ones, mid-20s, through committing suicide from gambling, feeling they couldn't stop. That was the main reason. And I felt that if I came out and I said, look, you know, you can stop. It's not easy, but if you do certain things... And that's what my reason for coming out. And I think, obviously, Steph is got a very caring side and he's very good at, you know, understanding people around a gambler.
We're looking at Steph now. You say she saved you. I mean, everybody will say that there comes a moment in a gambler's life when you realise, and there was something very personal to you two that clicked it, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think you need a reason to stop, you know, and, you know, Steph was definitely my reason. I think I just got to an age as well where I've just fed up of, you know, sort of living the life I was. Because when you're gambling, it's not just money that you're gambling with, it's time. You know, you spend all day long gambling and end up losing, and it's been a waste of time.
I must move on very briefly. I wish I had far more time. Sky Sports pundit Graham Souness says he doesn't regret describing football as a man's game after Chelsea's rather dramatic draw with Tottenham yesterday. I think we've got this. Just have a quick look.
All played the game. When you see simulation, people throw themselves to the ground. I've not seen that in the two games today. It's a man's game all of a sudden again. And the referee, I thought, had a fabulous game, other than something we'll point out later. But I thoroughly enjoyed both games today. That, OK, you know, if there is such a thing as a purist who watches football, might get a wee bit excited themselves when the two managers are getting upset with each other. But I'm sorry, it's professional sport. That's what it's all about. You want to win so much. Sometimes you can let go of your emotions and embarrass yourself.
Unrepentant later on Talk Sport. Your thoughts on that? I know it's a difficult subject.
Yeah, it is in a sense, but I think Graham was saying, really, football used to be a bit more physical. People didn't roll over quite so much when they got kicked. And
well, can I jump in and say the Lionesses who won the European Championships, when they get kicked up, they just got straight back up again. They don't squeal like men.
Exactly. And
was he being misogynistic? That's what he's been slaughtered
I don't think so.
today.
I think he was just saying that, you know, football was a bit more of a man's game, the men's football in the past. But, you know, the Lionesses have done fantastic. They're you know, in football, that's their place. You know, they've won the Euros. I mean,
amazing.
And they showed...
More than the men's team who won, they won nothing.
The two are separate, but we're all England, and the fans showed that the celebration for the ladies, for the girls, was just as much as for the men.
Peter Shilton, you've been a hero of mine for a long time. I'm going to ask one final question very quick. It's a one-word answer. Best player you ever played against?
He was a cheat, but Maradona.
Oh, you got it. Thank you, Peter Shilton. Now, for viewers who need advice on any of the issues raised just then, helpline information is available at talk.tv/helpline. So we're coming back with Jez's journos. Talk legend Mike Graham and political correspondent Ava Santina are next on Uncensored. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, my friends. Time for Jez's Journos. I'm joined by Talk TV's legend Mike Graham and political correspondent Ava Santina. They've become... You are a duo. Welcome.
We are officially now, because it's the second time you've had us on.
It is, yes.
And last time we went, it was quite successful, wasn't it?
Well, it was, actually. Your hosepipe thing's gone viral.
Well.
Ava, I'm going to start with you. Football is a man's game, said Graham Souness. He seems to have rode back a little bit tonight. Probably Sky Sports have... but he wasn't being... He wasn't meaning it like that. He was just saying it was a man... Two teams of men were playing football. Do you not agree?
He was being willfully ignorant.
That's a bit harsh. I think he was describing the game. He wasn't describing women's football versus men's football. He simply saw a game which we all saw, which we all got very excited about, because we like a bit of a punch-up. You don't want to see the women's coaches fighting each other, do you?
No.
But you do want to see the men's coaches pushing and shoving each other a bit. It's great fun.
You do, but the point was he was describing the behaviour, the abhorrent behaviour of those two managers, and he was suggesting that male violence is exciting and enjoyable.
It is.
And de facto is more exciting and enjoyable than the women's football.
Yes.
And that is a comment so outdated segregated, and just shows that gendered language
but how is he not
is
allowed
so
to...
needed still in football.
But how is he not allowed to enjoy men's football if that's what he likes? Why can't he enjoy it more than women's football if that's his opinion?
But why do you have to talk about football as if it's two different sports, the male and the female game? Like, it's one sport and two sides of it. He's, like, totally segregating both sides of the...
When the Lionesses won the Women's Euros, it was called the Women's Euros. And everyone was talking about how great women's football was.
And it was...
But we can't say men's football is also great?
No, but it was brilliant because women were not allowed to play football for so long.
Yeah.
I mean, women, well, for one,
playing football forever.
in schools, in schools at 11, I wasn't allowed to play football any longer. And hopefully the women, you know, taking that title, I am very good
outside
at it.
left?
I'm very good at it. I reckon
outside
I could,
left?
I was a goalie. I was in goal. So
I was making a political joke, James. James?
James. My name's James. Welcome to Piers Morgan Uncensored with David Graham. Brilliant. James, that went really well. Afghanistan, the Taliban are subjecting women. There's all sorts of stuff on this, isn't there?
I think it's our greatest shame, actually, at the fallout from Afghanistan. I think it's absolutely despicable what this government has done in terms of getting people back here. There are people over there right now who work with the British Army as translators, as communicators, and they're still stuck there and they are dying. There was a man that I met in Calais just a couple of months ago. I met him on the side. He'd come over on a boat, desperately trying to get to England. On the way over here, his wife was shot by the Taliban. And that's a history that we've left there.
We have to agree on that. The withdrawal, disgusting, and I'm not going to get involved in an argument with anybody on this.
But the Americans left us with very little choice. The Americans, don't forget, left the Taliban billions and billions of quid's worth of equipment, you know, high-ranking military equipment, which they've now got, and they can do anything they like with.
This is extraordinary. Look, watch Priti Patel today. Extraordinary. Watch this.
We should stand tall in terms of our collective effort by bringing over 21,000 people and also creating a new life for them in the United Kingdom. And that speaks volumes to the great work, the tremendous partnerships that we have across government, the ways of working at a time of crisis.
I have to say, Ava and I might not agree on most things. Shameful, and she will not be the Home Secretary in 4 weeks' time.
No,
the anniversary of the Taliban's, they're terrible, terrible,
I'm
sorry.
just pleased to see she's still actually doing some work, because I haven't seen her since July.
You know, she's not even doing any work, because when she's talking about these people, we've brought 21,000 over, half of those people are in hotels, at an immense cost to the taxpayer and an immense cost to those people's mental health. It's disgraceful.
Boris Johnson today is described as a fat ponce. Ava Santini says there's enough to criticise that lump of lard for without...
That is not what I said!
I'm joking. There's enough to criticise him for without discussing his weight.
My God, I think my eyes nearly fell out of my head. I
You're all
not say
Boris Johnson's done a fine job, though, don't you think?
Look, I mean, you know, I think the biggest criticism here is that he's on holiday. The last thing that he did before he went on holiday was he had a meeting with the big energy companies, and he decided that what was happening was really shocking and awful for the British people, but he couldn't do anything about it, so he was going to go off to Greece. That doesn't make any sense.
Let's bring in quickly Sir Keir Starmer's broken colour tonight, back with his Stone Island top, and they've come up with this plan, which 75% of Tory voters say. And for me, very quickly, David, it's about... sorry, is that... they're actually talking, because we're hearing nothing from the government.
Because that's the only plan they've seen. They haven't seen a plan from the Tories, so they see a plan from Keir Starmer. Already, though, it's been criticised as it will cost twice as much as he says it will cost. It'll actually cost 60 billion quid. And as far as Boris is concerned, well, let him stay on holiday. What's the point of him even having a job anymore? He's out of a job. He's not the Prime Minister. He can't do anything. Let him have a long holiday, stay in Greece until October.
But did he actually... I mean, I'm not sticking up for him because I'm scared of you a little bit. Did he want to stay on, or did he...
he would have rather stayed on, yeah. But I mean,
what's the point? None of them are there, the MPs. They're all on holiday, aren't they? Nothing... I mean, my thing about Starmer is, at least, and I'm not saying it'll work, but at least he's there on a television screen saying to these people suffering in the country,
hang on.
Do you know what? There is something.
But he's in Mallorca last week, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, and also, you know, back to Keir's policy, that's not really a whole policy, it's about a tenth of a policy. It's
very quickly, pets. I know you're into pets. Loads and millions of people had pets during lockdown because they didn't get on with their partners. I suspect that's a sweeping generalisation. And now, because of the cost of living, they're giving all these pets away. There's pets everywhere.
Apparently they're letting snakes and lizards just out in the street. So, I mean, when the torrents of rainwater...
Well, it's raining cats and dogs out there.
Yeah, it's raining cats and dogs. That's what you did there. But there's also going to be snakes, you know, there's going to be lizards, there's going to be terrapins, all floating down the street, because people have just thrown them out into the street. It's disgraceful.
Floating terrapins, says David Graham.
Yeah.
How exciting. Really spice up the cost of living crisis.
Are you a pet fan?
I mean, I'm not a massive pet fan. I live in London, so I'm not allowed to have one in my flat, am I? So.
You're not allowed to?
No, you're not allowed to if you're renting. Most landlords don't let you.
Have you got any pets?
Yeah, I've got a dog.
Have you?
Ziggy, yeah.
Ziggy play guitar.
Yeah, he's a Labrador. Doesn't play guitar.
Doesn't he not?
No.
And my favourites, Jez's journos, are the legendary Mary Graham. What did you really call me, James? Mike Graham back tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. on Talk TV. Also, Ava Santino. Will you come back next week? I love you both.
I'd love to, yeah.
Are you happy to come back next
week? I'd love to.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much indeed. Bear in mind, we started this by telling you it's absolutely hacking it down. And it is hacking it down all across the United Kingdom. But don't worry, it's just going to roll off the earth and not work. That is it from me. Whatever you're up to tonight, Piers made me absolutely promise to say this. Keep it uncensored. Have a great night. I'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock. You ready for this? Ta-ra!
Join me, Ian Collins, every day on Talk TV.
There is nothing we hate more than hypocrisy.
Discussing the big issues.
Why was it so hard to establish the deputy leader was at a meeting with her colleagues?
The callers.
Alan in Grimsby, Tracy in Burton-on-Trent. Dave, thank you very much.
Picking apart the big stuff.
This simply does not wash. Look who's back under the spotlight.
This is Talk TV News.
Good evening, I'm Nadira Tudor. Sir Keir Starmer says Labour's energy plan is the real answer to the cost of living crisis and the opposite of what the government's offering. The Labour leader said he would act now to stop energy bills rising, saving people £1,000 this winter, paid for by extending the windfall tax. Heathrow Airport has extended the cap on passenger numbers until after the half-term holidays. The existing limit of 100,000 travellers departing per day has been extended until October the 29th due to staff shortages. And the UK has become the first country to approve a COVID vaccine that specifically targets the Omicron variant. The new Moderna jab is expected to be used during this year's booster campaign. All over 50s and people in high-risk groups will be offered another jab from next month. That's all for now. We'll have more after the talk.